This is Steve.
And this is Shawn.
Welcome to Acro Media's High Five.
So, Steve, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to be talking about planning, specifically planning your development project.
Not urban planning or other types of planning.
No, specifically web development or software development or everything in
How many
between.
times do you think we can do that same joke
E-commerce
before it becomes really terrible?
Well, I will always think it's funny. I'm your biggest fan.
Thank you. Considering my mom stopped subscribing.
Yes, I know. Well, so the last episode we talked about was the importance of building a budget for a development project, knowing your budget going into it, and actually a few steps to take to formulate a budget. Mm-hmm. And then we also touched on the importance of planning a budget for planning, specifically. Mm-hmm. More or less going around the idea that if you don't have a budget for planning, it's really hard to actually plan because you're kind
or to have a budget
that actually makes sense to achieve the goal, right? So we're assuming in this case that you have a budget and you've done a little bit of the homework to say, hey, this is my problem over here, and this is how much I have to spend on planning or actually fixing that problem. So,
and if you don't, watch our sweet episode on budgeting.
Yes,
because otherwise we are never going to talk about budgeting again.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, we want to talk a little bit about what actually is involved in planning, because we'll have clients and prospects come to us and say, this is the next thing I want to do, or this is the thing I want to tackle. Now what do I do, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we want in an ideal situation is you've done your homework to say that you've identified an issue and you've prepared that you realize that you need to spend not only budget on this, but time and energy of your stakeholders to fix it. Now you're coming to us and now we actually have to be the experts and guide you through that process. And so I guess, Shawn, what part of the process do you think makes sense for us to talk about?
So, I mean, if I'm coming with a problem, say I'm, I have a website problem here, what am I sort of providing to you, and
That's
then
right.
what are we going to launch into?
Sure.
Like, I have to have a problem. Like, is it one sentence? Is it like, do I have to provide you 10 documents or?
Oh, the more documents, the better, until it's like document overload.
15 documents?
Yeah.
Like when they bury a lawyer in paperwork and they come in with all those file boxes.
For sure. I think the thing that I would say right out of the gate is prepare for giving some time, for one, because we're going to have to ask a lot of questions. And when I say a lot of questions, I mean a lot of questions.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It really is. But the thing is that without being able to ask questions, it's hard to really dig down and figure out, is the problem you're identifying the true problem, or is there a problem something else in the chain that's causing that problem? And we have to know the context as to, within that problem, what are the key contributors to making that problem so big, so that we can figure out what we want to eliminate, change, or integrate.
But like, if you're the expert, why do you have to ask me a ton of questions?
Because I don't want to make any assumptions, really. An example I could give you was in the last episode we talked about fulfillment, and I could look at your fulfillment. I could look at how your website works, your commerce system, all the way down to how you fulfill orders. But I'm not necessarily going to know what element is costing you what. I'm not going to know the skill set of your staff. I'm not going to know how you box your product. I'm not going to know where you ship. I have to ask these questions in order to get a further understanding of the intricacies of your business. And then based off of that, we can look at a bit of a competitive landscape, see what others are doing, seeing if there's anything we can mimic from those people. We can look at our past problems we've solved and see if there's anything we can leverage from the past. And in some cases, we can just take our expertise of different tech stacks and say, hey, maybe your problem is solved, now that I understand, the nitty gritty. If you, jump onto this piece of software, we integrate this.
Maybe it's really straightforward.
System.
Maybe it's like I manually write out all my labels, and you're like, well, don't do that.
Yeah,
let's automate it.
I had a question I would ask you is, how do you print your labels? If you said to me, we don't print them, we manually write them all, that would be a question I'd have to ask. So in any planning, the very first step is stakeholder interviews for the most part. And more or less just a lot of questions being asked. If it's a small planning phase or a large planning phase, there's going to be interviews. You got to pretty much plan for that.
So do I have to round up like a whole bunch of people from my company to answer different questions and stuff?
Not necessarily. Oftentimes we can prepare agendas, we can prepare questions, and then you can figure out who within your company makes most sense to answer them. In many cases, it can even just be the product owner or the owner, depending on company size who we're talking to. You don't always need to bring in those folks, but it sometimes does help if you have a stakeholder who is really the person like suffering in the pain.
Right.
You know,
like Sheila does accounting and it's terrible, and I
Yeah.
have no idea what.
Well, let's bring and
what
talk to
crazy
Sheila, right?
Madness happens over there.
Let's not fix Mr. CEO's problems for Sheila. Let's just go talk to Sheila, and maybe she has a pretty good idea of what her problems are. That's going to be a big step, and there's going to be other steps that revolve around those interviews. There's going to be a lot of secondary steps, like I said, whether or not it revolves more research, whether or not we need to look at other like technologies, whether we need to see like what your current e-commerce ecosystem looks like to see if there's any pieces that are disjointed, we need to change, add, remove, edit, etc. And then from there,
so like we know my problem now.
You know
all my terrible problems.
Yeah, you got it.
Now what are we doing?
We have a few different tools to further identify what we should be tackling, and kind of fast forward a bit. We eventually get to a point in which we want to start prototyping and architecting how you fix that problem. Right. This assumes we've done our homework to get the buy-in. This assumes that the steps we're going to take are the steps that you deem appropriate. Like these are the problems.
Yeah, we have 3 problems. We've identified them.
You're okay that you're going to integrate with something else.
Sheila's also agreed with them.
Exactly. Sheila's really excited that we're going to integrate into an automation. Etc.
Yeah. Now accountants don't usually feel the emotion of excitement, but yes.
Deep down, it's there, right?
Yeah.
And so then we start doing just the homework of actually how that works, and this is really where we start earning our money. Is because if anyone could do that job, then you wouldn't be talking to us. But now that we've identified the problem, we understand these are the types of steps we need to take to fix them. That's going to be the primary.
Okay, so this is where the expertise comes in.
This is really I actually think depending if you can ask the right questions, that's actually a bit of it. But I'm not going to start gloating too much, right? So when you start doing the architecting phases, and what I mean by architecting would be looking at your current tech stack and actually helping you see the flows of where the technologies are going to move, the actual steps that are going to take place, whether or not there's going to be back-end dashboards as to how you're actually going to manipulate that data. All of those steps are going to be done typically in a smoke and mirrors type way, because you don't want to just start coding.
So we're talking mock-ups, flow charts,
you
that
got it,
kind of
wireframes. That's going to be a big exercise here, because you don't want to just start coding and just start doing going way too far when we're not even sure if everything is going to necessarily work well together, right? And this is important to be a step that's very iterative. That's the one I wanted.
Unique.
And
New York.
Yes. And we want this to be very fast-paced. So this is where the client gets really involved with us, and we can continue to run past different ideas and workflows past them, and hopefully getting pretty rapid feedback to say, yes, that'll work, no, that won't work in my industry, or no, that won't work for my specific business because of X, Y, Z, and we can continue finding these alternate paths to find the most efficient way. What you end up getting by the end of this would generally be a wireframed prototype of the back end and the front end, as well as a behind the scenes, flow charts and mapping from an even text perspective of here's how this module is going to work
of these 2 APIs are going to connect, which doesn't
this data is going to go from here to there.
It's
it's going to receive this data this way, and then it's going to spit that data over here, and then that's the way this channel is going to accept that data, and we're going to do all of that. And then now we're going to have a clear landscape of the actual solution we need to build, or that they need to build, right? Maybe they have their own technical team who can actually implement it. Right. Maybe we're looking to implement it. Maybe it's a meet in the middle, but that's going to be
maybe it's a third-party vendor. Maybe half of it is like, let's put the boxes next to the shipping people or whatever.
In that case, like that's
it's probably not that simple.
Well,
but,
in some cases it can be. It can be, hey, maybe some of your problems would be solved if you got bigger boxes. Like that might not be the solution, but that might be 5%.
But I mean, even a little more of it can be, like, hey, maybe if you had, 4 shipping terminals instead of 1, and you can have hardware bottlenecks and other weird things like that and stuff. So
being in this kind of consultancy role, what we want to know, what we want to make sure we're experts of is when it comes to the tech stack, we want to know everything from website all the way down to fulfillment and everything in between. So when I say everything in between, we have to understand, just shipping parameters, taxation. We have to figure out, accounting. If we're not familiar with those things, we can't really say that we're the experts or consultants in this field. Excuse me.
Right, we don't have to be an accountant, but we have to understand some rudimentaries of, finances and tax.
These are the types of things
have to go over to you and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. This is the type of information you're going to need. We're going to have to understand the type of technologies that work well with those systems, so that even if it's going to require some client homework and say, I think either one of these 2 systems will work, we have to be able to help narrow it down to 2 for them or 3 for them, things like that. So that's
at no point in that am I actually building the actual stuff.
No. That's probably one of the things that is most mind-boggling, if I can say, about a whole planning phase, is that we're in an industry in which everyone is so excited to give the glossy mock-up and start coding right away. It's like,
It's all digital and ethereal.
we can
and
just
whatever,
change it, right?
Like,
And you're going to hear the word like agile project management methods, right? We can just make something and then we can change it. Well, yeah, you can, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. I'm not saying to not adopt agile project management. In fact, that's a really good way of going about it. But don't just jump into development and saying, we have the experts in house.
I mean, a true agile one does have like a planning and
It does. It really does.
It's a bunch of cycles of the same thing, but it always starts off with the planning.
You got it, right? And so the hope would be at the end of this planning, we have a clear picture of everything we want to tackle, everything we want to fix, and the ways we're going to go about doing it. So we can actually start planning our tasks. We can plan exactly what the UX and creative will be doing. We're going to be planning what the front ends are going to be doing. We're going to be planning what the softwares are going to be doing, as well as we can start understanding whether or not we need to bring in other outside third parties in order to connect in, and kind of everything in between. Also, even from the standpoint of, is there going to be something on the client side? Maybe they have a developer or an IT side. Maybe they have a security specialist that we have to involve too. That can be really common, and we don't want to leave those guys out, right? We want to make it into a joint project.
And so that's something we want to identify in planning.
Absolutely.
Well, like who needs to be involved and that kind of stuff.
It blows me away sometimes that if development companies will just go and be like, we can do it all. That's probably not the best approach.
I shouldn't have been saying that, is what you're saying.
Exactly. This whole time. Because in many cases, it's actually best to say, we can do these things over here, but your specific circumstance means that maybe we should take this a little bit differently, right? Like, when you can say, we're not totally familiar what to do in that section, you're actually gaining a decent amount of rapport with that client because they can start trusting you a little bit more to say, yeah, the 80% of things over here totally make sense, and we can understand why maybe you're not expert marketers because you're developers, or maybe you do really understand taxation, but taxation in the United States is insane, so maybe you can only know so much. Right, and you actually have to bring in a specialist or a certain integrator to make sure like you actually have the
right. Or we were joking about the boxes, but it's like if you want to lay out your warehouse or something, like we're not the people.
We're not the people to do that. We can tell you how to integrate it. We can make sure that we have efficient ways of printing the labels. We have efficient ways of actually streamlining it from.
And we could maybe tell you if something's scrappy. We can say, hey, we timed you, and it takes you 14 minutes to process an order, but it's like, minute 2, you're in the software, and then minute 12, you're in the software. What do you do for those 10 minutes? I don't know what you do, but it's wrong.
Yeah, if you have a throbber going the whole time and you're just waiting for it, maybe you have a performance issue. Let's look at fixing that, right? So I hope that gives you some context.
Yeah, plus, we got to say the word throbber.
Yes, I was waiting for that.
Yeah. Can we do too long didn't read that?
Sure. When you plan, don't expect any coding to happen. Expect that you as the client are going to have to give time and energy into actually answering a lot of questions. And it's going to be iterative. I said it right that time. And it's going to be fast. And we want to make sure that we tackle everything. And we want to make sure that you know that in some cases you're going to be the expert. In some cases we're going to be the expert. And in some cases we might even have to grab an extra person who might be the expert.
Sounds good.
All right. Subscribe to our channel. Comment below. And if you have any questions about planning or anything about this episode, do so below as well.
Also, follow us on Facebook, check out our blog at acromedia.com, and follow me on Twitter.